Hi, this is Andrew McLaren, and I want to talk to you about why teachers have to offer test retakes. There's a lot of philosophy about why they might not, or they might offer a retake only up to like 70%, because you can't earn as many points as the kids who knew it the first time, right? That type of stuff. So the science has kind of come to a consensus around this and good grading practices, but most teachers are not actually using them. It's kind of a mess right now, but we're going to talk a little bit about where these ideas came from. So I want to talk to you about the book that I'm getting these ideas from, what these good grading practices actually are, and some examples of some assessments designed with this in mind that I've done. So most of these ideas, they're coming from this book called Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman. He's got a ton of different studies that he's written into this book where he looks at different grading practices and their impacts. So if you do like A versus B, what happens to student growth over the year and their understanding on like assessments, like those big state assessments, and that there are a number of things that we know make people do better um, through grading practices, but most teachers aren't doing them. And we got to fix it, right? So retakes, they're very, very important because if we don't offer retakes, it hurts our most vulnerable populations. So if you have students who are chronically absent or dealing with like poverty, and that can affect like the absenteeism or support at home or people's ability to help with homework or internet access, all those things. If you don't offer retakes, it makes it so there's an unfair situation in the classroom. But if you do offer retakes, it kind of alleviates some of that unfairness. Um, for example, maybe a kid was able to study at home because they had internet access, and another kid wasn't the day before the test. So if someone came in a little bit more prepared than the other person, or maybe someone's had a family emergency and they can't study that week. That week is a bad week for them and they don't do well on the test that week. Why can't they show you the following week that now they can do that stuff? So it's very important that students are able to be given retakes after a test, because maybe that was a bad day and some people have more bad days than others, right? So we got to be considering that and giving them those opportunities to show that growth and help us actually understand what they know, right? Because if they've mastered a skill, we should show that in their grade. We shouldn't punish someone for being wrong the first time if they're correct the second and third time, essentially. So if we're talking about who has the final say on grades, legally speaking, in most states, this is teachers. They 100% have like the legal final say on what the kid's grade is, but they have to have some sort of evidence. And if they don't, they're going to get scored bad by their principals in their evaluations, which could ultimately lead to them losing their jobs, right? So teachers have good motivation to have good grading practices or make everyone feel that the grades are fair, because it can ultimately cost them their jobs, right? So that being said, because they have that legal protection, a lot of people are like, nope, I'm doing my grading practice how it is. That is my right. You can't force me to do otherwise. So you can kind of get into this like back and forth, but then there's like IEPs and students who have those specialized plans. Like if you don't make those accommodations, that can cause a huge, huge problem, right? And then that's like the whole school is getting looked at, making sure they're following this kid's federally mandated accommodations. So you got to be making sure that you're really bringing in everyone and talking about this and collaborating. Most teachers that I know have similar grading practices to their team members. They're teaching the same kids, like the same grade level or science department might have similar grading practices. So that kind of is where grading practices come from and why people have similar things. Ultimately, the teacher has final say though, and you have to keep that in mind. So these are also some things that I came into when I was teaching. I thought grading on effort was good and it would like build character. Um, though it really does have the opposite effect. So you can't really be just giving kids points for doing things in class. Really, you should be giving them points for if they understand stuff. So tests should be hard. but they should be many opportunities to retake those tests and show that understanding. So instead of boosting your score by doing more classwork, you should be boosting your score by getting ready for the test and understanding the material better and performing better, right? So this isn't about charity. A lot of people think that when you give retakes, you're being nice to the students. Um, no, it's more about just making sure that there's a fair situation. So it may feel like charity, but it actually ends up not being just like free points for people who did bad because they have to work hard. Unless you've got a bad test where it's like multiple choice and they just mark the correct answers without understanding it, then you're right. That's just gonna boost points without them understanding more. But you can easily redesign things to prevent that from happening. I'll talk more about that soon. So also extra credit's pretty bad. You don't want to be throwing in extra credit. Extra credit has the wrong um, effect of making grades kind of inaccurate as well. And so a lot of people will get kind of boosted grades by classwork and extra credit, and then their tests they won't do very well on, but they'll get like an okay score in the class. And then they'll go to the next year and they're like, hey, I thought you had like a B level understanding, but on all of your tests, you're failing. And it's like, well, last year they also nearly failed all their tests, but they did all their classwork. So they looked like they knew what they were doing in their grade. So it's really important that grades are accurate. Retakes help you get more accurate measurements of students' understanding, which could help in like placement of those students as well, right? So it's very, very important for also long-term motivation for students. So like um, if you fail like the first test or the first three tests, you might just be like, I'm done for the school year. I'm not trying anymore. But if you offer retakes, that motivation, that chance to show understanding is suddenly there. And it's been proven that people often do take advantage of that. And teachers like they're not gonna actually use this. But I've seen this. I've seen many students with who are on like individual learning plans, like they have special needs. And they're like, no, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna fix this and I'm gonna do better on it. And they totally did. It was really, really cool. And then that motivation made them work harder in class and they did better on the next couple assignments. It was pretty incredible. You know, if you give that opportunity for students to show that they actually do know something and they actually do know it, then that builds that comfort in that class and their likelihood to try harder, right? Um, and it can be completely fair. You can design these so that students have seen the test beforehand, they know what's on the test, and that gives them no advantage. You basically have to stay away from multiple choice. If it's like free response questions, that's pretty hard to like cheat on a retake to do better. Um, and it's also important to keep in mind that you don't just give kids the highest score. Like if they took the same quiz three times and they got like 70, 60, and then like 90, you don't have to give them a 90. You don't have to give them an A. Maybe that 90 was a fluke. Maybe you're like, I'm not so sure if that score is accurate. You can give them the test another time and see if they do well. So it's not about just giving them the highest one or the average between them. Because if you do averages, if someone did very bad on their first test, it doesn't matter how well they do on the second and third, they're probably not going to do very well in the class overall, right? So you can't do averages. That doesn't really fix the motivation issue. Um, People think it does, but science has shown that it doesn't. You have to actually uh, essentially not just do some math, actually look at it and think about what the score should be based off those other test scores that have came in and be able to justify it, of course, to parents. So the most accurate grading system has retakes. I would still probably like look at classwork, but not count that towards any points, but just keep that as like data to show parents, oh, they haven't been doing their classwork. I wonder if that's related to why they didn't do well on the test, right? Um, and if you have retakes, this allows students to improve scores if they've learned later. That's a big, big part of this. And um, I personally, I wasn't ready to do this, all these different practices when I first learned about them, but the retakes was something I could get on board with, giving kids retakes up to 100%. And also keep in mind that flexibility is key. If you have a student who doesn't speak English, maybe having them draw out something, you can score that and show that they understand the concept, right? So you have to have flexibility where you're not having all the students have to do the same thing to show a certain skill or get a certain score. Um, this is like the video projects where students can do a video showing their understanding, or like they can build something in a video game. And so if you design an assessment that has like kind of flexibility in it, that helps a lot with retakes as well, because then students can just show you, hey, I do know how to do this. Check out this thing that I made. So you can bring students in to have them consider how they can show a retake or show an understanding of a concept, right? Also very, very important. Everybody needs to know that retakes are an option, and it needs to be available in the class. Like it can't be done outside of school because transportation can be hard for people. So it should be available in the classroom during class. Like when I was doing independent work time, when the students were working independently, I had a space in my classroom that I would move students to go do test retakes. Or sometimes schools have other rooms available um, to allow students to go finish up tests in those rooms. So, if you're like, well, what does this really look like? How do I design an assessment that allows students to do like iterative attempts? Maybe not even a retake, but just to like fix something up. I've done that a lot. So what I did a lot was something called claim evidence reasoning. So like if you're not familiar with claim evidence reasoning, it's also referred to as CER, where there's like a claim part, an evidence part, and a reasoning part. And these are different comments that I might give a student. And this is an example of an assignment where students had to write out a claim. And this is an example, I think, of student work. And then they had to write out their observations, source, and procedure. And then they had to label things in the reasoning section using these vocab words correctly. And then I had a rubric where I scored it based off of that. And so this, you could imagine like a student's attempted their claim evidence reasoning. I've gone in, I've put comments on like their observations section. And so I'm like fixing that up, right? And so all the stuff ends up getting tweaked in the slide. And uh, then the student fixes it up and then I score it again, right? So this is kind of like one of those things where they could just keep on turning it in as many times as they need to. I give them some feedback on it and then they fix it up. So that's really, really good for like writing assignments and having a rubric. That's kind of pretty intuitive for working through that. And then this is another example of a rubric for CER where this is how I would score them. Like I would go through this, I put comments on it, and then I would score based off of how they did, right? And then so maybe they got a 2 on this section, but they could get a 3. Like they could improve it by fixing up those comments that I put on there and then resubmitting it. So that's one type of assessment that allows for retakes or corrections that allow you to show that understanding. And so I've done this a lot. There's like other claim evidence reasonings that I did. This is a slightly different rubric that I did the next year, um, where there's key concepts and vocab words, and they had to write out claim evidence reasoning. And this one did have a rubric as well. I'm not sure if I have it linked on here though. Yeah, actually that was the rubric that we were looking at already. So that's the idea, is that if you have a good rubric, they can go back, they can fix up those mistakes and like fill it in, right? And then here's another example of one of these sections done. So they've got their claim, evidence, reasoning, and then I'd go in there, put comments on that, and then score it in Google Classroom. Which, by the way, the comment bank saves a lot of time with this. Makes it super easy and doable. Because you're probably looking at this and be like, all those comments, no way. I didn't write them all out. each time I just had them in the comment bank. So I started typing one out, it popped up, and I just selected it. It's totally doable. Um, oh, okay. So here's a different one. This is for modeling. So I did a similar sort of um, idea here where there's a challenge where they've got to draw in these little models on the slides. And I gave them a video showing them how to do that. And then they needed to also do some work on these other slides and explain it. Um, and then there's some written stuff as well. And then there's this rubric right here where I've got these different sections that I was scoring and how they did on those sections. Um, sorry, the thing's kind of getting cut off a little bit. But basically, there's sections like the scale, the distances, the time, and the limits of the model and all that stuff. So like there's these different sections in the rubric that I was scoring for, and I put comments on it as well so that students could see those comments. This is an example of one of them. So this is like what a student had submitted, and I put like comments on there, like for example, that they're not showing any interactions here, like the molecular attraction is not shown. So I might write that as a comment. Molecular attraction is not shown. Um, or the fact that these aren't at the bottom of the container. I might also put a comment that a liquid and a gas should be at the bottom of a container and just put it on here. And I wouldn't tell them which one is the liquid and gas. They got to figure that out. But I'll give them some hints to help them get closer to what I'm looking for in the rubric, right? So if you design something that's like an open-ended task where they're building a model or they're writing something out, that's pretty good for a retake. If you're doing multiple choice though, it's not impossible to turn like a multiple choice question into sorry, I showed you the CER and the modeling. To take those multiple choice questions, it's pretty easy to turn them into free response. You just change the wording, and so you could be like, which of the you could say like, I don't know, a, a fox hunting a rabbit is an example of what type of interaction, and then you give them four options, right? You could just tweak that and be like, okay, like what example is this of an interaction, right? Or what type of interaction do we have when a fox um, tries to catch a rabbit, right? So you can tweak the wording on these things. So instead of having all these options that they're picking from, they have to give you the information. And that might be difficult for students who are on IEPs. But if they have an adult that works with them, that adult can kind of read out the question for them and can coach them out a little bit to help them understand what they should be writing. And actually that works way better for students on IEPs in my experience than doing multiple choice. Because I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes I get confused by just the format of the multiple choice question when, especially when they say which of these is not a blank, and then you have to label which one is and which one is not. And the process of doing multiple choice can cause students to get questions wrong sometimes when they knew the content, right? So it's really important that students who are getting thrown off by wording have that clarified, and and that you're giving them not like misleading multiple choice questions, because sometimes people make tricky multiple choice questions, which is just wrong. You can't do that for students who have learning disabilities. You can't mislead them. Um, it creates inaccuracies in the grade, right? So, big picture on this, retakes should always be offered up to 100% for everyone. Everybody needs to know about that. And the test, if you're doing that, should be a lot like basically the grade. And um, that's okay. That's totally okay to have those types of things. But students need to be able to show their level understanding. It's very important that tests are actually showing students ability. And I know as a teacher, this can be difficult to kind of comes to terms with, especially if you've been doing this the wrong way and you're like, oh man, I've been hurting all these people. Um, but it's never too late to change, and it's never too late to give people opportunities to grow themselves as well as teachers, right? Okay. Thank you. I'll see you around. This has been Andrew McLaren.